Okay, loves, let's go ahead and finish this out because I want to get done with the Great Depression. It's depressing. Haha, that was funny. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and start on this slide right here. So with that, go ahead and find right after all your alphabet agencies, all of your discuss of relief, recovery, and what's the last R? Reform. FDR's New Deal will completely change the way of how we think about government. When you are now in a bad economic time, who's supposed to help you? The government, right? With that, this was the turning point in American history where now government is there to help you. And sometimes we rely on government a little bit too much. And to be honest with you, and that's one of the criticisms of the New Deal we'll talk about. But you got to think about all the New Deal agencies we talked about. We talked about the WPA, the Works Program Administration, giving 8.5 million jobs. We talked about your CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, that gave out so many jobs and fed and housed young men to leave the other men open for jobs, the older men. You talked about the FDIC that insured your federal bank deposits, which basically made the banks regulated. Talked about the SSA. That one's huge. Social Security Administration, saying that all elderly people would have a social safety net if they worked throughout their life. Well, all would, no matter if they worked throughout their life. They get a check every month. It's a social safety net, Social Security. We talked about a couple ones that were a little bit interesting. The Agriculture Adjustment Agency, the AAA, not the AAA like for the tires, but the Agriculture Adjustment Agency that actually paid farmers to do nothing. Literally, don't produce any crop, don't produce any stock. That way it keeps supply low and keeps prices high. Was good for your white landowners, but kind of hurt your tenant farmers. And you've got other ones like the Tennessee Valley Authority, all those ones. Long story short, it was a massive program. It made federal government so important, mostly because they were the only people who had money. So that's why they're so important. But some of the legacy of the New Deal is simply going to be that now that's who we turn to for help is the government. Now, that's good and everything. And when you're falling down, you want somebody to help you up. But what happens when you rely on somebody to help you up? And what happens when the government, the federal government, what part of my triangle, top part of the triangle, gets way too big? Let me go ahead and let you get this slide down. Oh, crazy. Too fast. Get this slide down, pause it, and then turn it back on. You should be pausing it. Okay. So with that, criticisms of the New Deal. First thing I want you to do is I want you to circle criticisms. This is a critique. Is this good or is this bad? What do you think? Good or bad? Bad. Now, a criticism is going to be a negative. A lot of the times we like to think criticism is constructive criticism. In particular, if I tell you you're not doing something right, it's not because I hate you, it's because I want you to be better, okay? But with that, criticism is definitely something that is a problem. So on the back of your Great Depression and New Deal folder, you're supposed to do 3 criticisms of the New Deal. Well, here's your slide that tells you your criticisms you can pick for. The first criticism we need to talk about is government, the federal government in particular, and the president become too powerful. Massively important star, this one. It's the reason it's the only green one here. The other thing I would do is draw a little line out beside this one right here and draw what geometric figure do I always tell you to think of when I think about the federal, state, and the local governments. A triangle. So draw it out there. In this criticism of the New Deal, what part of the the government agencies, federal, state, or local, got a ton bigger? Was it the state and local? Was it the local? Or was it the federal government? Every time they passed a New Deal law, every time in those first 100 days we have another act, Federal Emergency Banking Relief Act, Social Security Administration Act, this act, that act, all these acts, that's the federal government getting bigger. So circle that top of the triangle and then literally put arrows as if it was getting bigger. One thing that a lot of people say is that the New Deal and Franklin Delano Roosevelt get way too powerful. You want the picture perfect example of that? Out beside president, I want you to draw another little arrow somewhere and then put 4 terms. That's how many terms FDR was elected to. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Half of it was because he pulled us out of the Great Depression and people loved him. He just fireside chats, all this good stuff. But half of it is because you want to know what really pulled us out of the Great Depression? Is World War II. put everybody back to work. And when you're in a war, do you want the same president who's been doing a good job? Of course you do. So he runs for 4 terms. Because remember, technically it wasn't a law that you couldn't do that. Technically, the only reason people always stopped it too is because who had done it before? Washington. Good job. So with that, make sure you get that down. That's the massive one in my opinion. Next thing, violated laissez-faire. Here's the deal. Laissez-faire equals capitalism. Put that up beside it. Equals capitalism. Laissez-faire means what? Let it be. It means government gets to do, business gets to do what business needs to do, and government doesn't regulate it. Which, honest to God, is really pretty good because that means the market kind of determines the market. It means that what people want is what people get, and kind of survival of the fittest. So you got to be strong to survive. But when there's no rules, could it get ugly? Yeah. So it violates the laissez-faire. The next thing, Supreme Court declared NIRA, we'll talk about this one in class, and the AAA, you know what the AAA is, Agriculture Adjustment Agency Administration, unconstitutional, underline unconstitutional. This is going to cause some problems because when the Supreme Court, with the power of, what was that principle that Marbury versus Madison established? Judicial what? Review. They said that the NIRA and the AAA were unconstitutional. They slapped them down. They nullified them. Done. FDR was super pissed off. In fact, he's so mad he's going to do something interesting in a second. The next thing he's going to want, another criticism, and this one, in my opinion, gets a star as well. Deficit spending. Government spends money. Every single one of these agencies, it costs money to stimulate the economy, which is all good and great, relief, recovery, reform, and to help people. But here's the deal. If the government didn't have the money, they spent it and they ran a deficit, which means they go into, you ready to circle a word? What's that word? Dirtiest 4-letter of the word there is. You can't even believe I put it on a PowerPoint because it's that bad of a word. Debt. Massive problem. Government was spending money. Government didn't have money. That equals debt. The very last one is definitely one of the more interesting ones, and it's definitely a topic for class because it's kind of a little bit of a touchy subject. But a lot of people critique the New Deal because they said it creates a welfare state. I want you to look at that word, welfare. Here's the deal. I'm going to be honest with you. Welfare can be something that people need. But the problem people are going to say about the New Deal is it creates a population who, and I want you to underline this word, relied on the government to live. So not as in, hey, I lost my job, I need food stamps just for a couple months to get me over the hump, but hey, I never got a job, I don't want to look for a job because I know the government will pay for me no matter what. They said this possibly was created with the construction of FDR's New Deal. I don't know whether I believe it, but you got to think to yourself, do you see a lot of welfare fraud going around in today's day and age? Food stamp fraud, welfare fraud, that kind of stuff like that. There's a little bit of it, I will be honest with you. I've seen it before. But here's the deal. Are there some people who need welfare? Yeah. I got to tell you, my aunt and uncle up in Seattle, Washington, they at one point, my uncle lost his job. They had just had their daughters. They needed help. He was on welfare for maybe 1 year. They got help. They got food stamps. Then he got his job. He is now the managing position. He pays a ton of money in taxes now. So did he kind of pay for what he got that 1 year? Yes. But what happens when you've never gotten off welfare and you don't want to get off welfare, you just want to live off the government? Is that a problem? That's why it's one of the criticisms. Ooh, some of these cartoons are good. We're going to look at some of them in class. I don't want to take too much of your time. I love this cartoon of FDR, the old reliable. What does it mean if something's reliable? It means that you can rely on it. It's trustworthy. It's always going to be there. He's pulling a rabbit out of a hand. What's he dressed as? A magician. He said, this is one rabbit that's never failed me. What's his rabbit or his trick, though? Spending, which is great. Again, it's great to put money in the economy, but when you put so much money in the economy and you go into debt, it's going to be a problem. Oh, this is one of my favorite ones. Oh, so much of a favorite one. In fact, I think it's on the test, so I don't even really want to give it away. But who is sick? Uncle Sam. Who's the doctor there to fix him? FDR and his New Deal remedies is what it says. And who's the nurse? It's an ugly nurse. Congress. What's the medicine? All the agencies. This quote up here, it says, of course, we may have to change remedies if we don't get results. Basically, this is a good thing or a bad thing? He's there to help Uncle Sam get better, but the problem is he's got to try a bunch of different stuff. Every time he tries one of these bottles, it costs him money. Oops. Here's a good cartoon. Might show up on a quiz or a test. Now, successes of the New Deal. I'll be really honest with you. There are massive amounts of successes. Pause it, get it down. Americans in 1939 who had wanted a New Deal to continue was 55%. That's why they will vote for him again. 37% regarded it as a bad influence and wanted a new president. But 55% for his basically going into his third term, that's a pretty dang good approval rating. It stimulated the economy. Out beside here, put a dollar sign. He poured money into the economy. He got it going. It put people back to work. There you go. Jobs. Improved morale, self-confidence. One thing I would put out beside here is a 4-letter word, hope. H-O-P-E. This is him talking to the American people. This is direct relief. This is breadlines. This is jobs. This is the playgrounds that the WPA built. This is literally his fireside chats. You get what I'm saying here? He gave them hope. Remember, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. And then the government's role becoming directly involved with helping people. But I'll be honest with you. You want to know what ended the Great Depression? World War II. Put everybody back to work. Now, here is just some basic kind of vocab for this chapter. Socialism, an economic system. I know we've already talked about this. Believes in government ownership and cooperative ownership rather than competition or laissez-faire. The government controls all distribution of products. One critique of the New Deal, and you might want to write this out beside this slide, critique of New Deal, is that it is a socialistic system where the government controls everything and controls production and distribution rather than capitalism and laissez-faire. Now, really think about what we've learned with these agencies and all the power that went to the federal government, FDR. Could you see where this critique is true? I could. But did they need it in the Great Depression? I kind of think they kind of did. Now, here's one of the last things we're going to talk about. Pause it. Get this slide down. FDR's court packing. Pause it. Okay, let's talk about it. Now, Supreme Court is striking down the legislation. One thing I want you to write out beside this slide is the two things they struck down. First thing was the NIRA. Okay. The next thing was the AAA Agriculture Adjustment Agency. FDR doesn't like this. Man, he wins every election he's in. He said, you can't tell me what to do, Supreme Court. So he proposes a bill to allow the president to name a new federal judge on the Supreme Court for each person who did not retire by the age of 70. But here's the problem. The Supreme Court is supposed to be untouchable. Separation of powers. Checks and what? Balances. The president is not supposed to fire Supreme Court justices. They are supposed to have the power of judicial review. 6 justices were over the age limit, and basically he wasn't going to fire him. He said, hey, you're kind of old, so I'm going to put another young justice who I appoint, who I gave him his job, kind of the spoil system a little bit. So if I give you your job on the Supreme Court, are you going to vote for my law when it comes up for judicial review? Of course you are. You're going to say approved, constitutional. But what happens when these older judges are like, hey, you're getting a little too powerful, FDR. These pieces of laws, these laws, NIRA and AAA, you shouldn't be able to control the economy. So I'm going to strike them down. Well, FDR doesn't like that. So he increases the number of justices, or shall I say he would have increased the number of justices from 9 to 15, giving FDR a majority. I want you to make sure you circle that, giving FDR a majority to appoint all of the people he wants in the Supreme Court. So literally, it would have put the Supreme Court in his pocket. Can you do this? You want to know what massive constitutional principle from 1787 this violates? The president is messing with the Supreme Court. They are supposed to check and balance each other out. The CourtPacking Bill, that would have absolutely been unconstitutional. It would have packed the court with FDR's people. Here's a good cartoon. I love this cartoon. Kind of look at it. It's a pretty good one. Now here's the last one. Real quickly. End of an era. I'm going to be honest with you. The New Deal was an amazing idea, and it did help out this country. It kind of pulled us out of it. But I'll be honest with you. World War II ended it. FDR's second term had limited successes. Congress began to block the legislation. We just talked about that. Caused economic downturn by cutting government spending. Underline that right there. The era ended in 1939 when, ironically, World War II starts in Europe, gave Americans a stronger sense of stability and security. Remember, hope, and cut government spending. But I'll be honest with you, the second New Deal, not so powerful. So make sure you know all of this, and you will be good to go. Y'all do a great job.